A simple woman stood in the center of the flight hangar with a clipboard in hand, her unmarked jumpsuit drawing every eye like a target. A circle of cadets in blue and black pilot gear laughed openly, one of them nudging his friend and saying loud enough for everyone to hear, "Looks like the janitorial crew's trying to learn to fly." Another, the colonel's son, grinned as he peeled a sticker from a supply box and slapped it onto her back bright yellow, printed with the words, "Hangar Rat." He smirked and added, "For safety. Wouldn't want a ground tech getting mistaken for an officer." Around them, others chuckled and turned back to their cockpit drills as if mocking her were just another morning routine. Zoe McNeil said nothing. She adjusted the clipboard in her hand, felt the sticker pressed tighter against her flight suit as she moved, and kept her eyes fixed on the half-dismantled simulator across the bay. She didn't ask for respect. She didn't explain the patch sewn discreetly into the inside lining of her jumpsuit. An old piece of cloth, faded with years, embroidered with her father's squadron number. And she certainly didn't mention the sequence of override codes she had memorized by heart, or the long hours she spent studying decommissioned interface modules in the shadowed corners of the archive stacks. To them, she was a maintenance tag-along, a girl with no rank, no name, no purpose beyond maybe fetching parts and wiping glass. They didn't see the way she watched the training displays, how her eyes flicked across error logs and power curves with calm precision. They didn't know that she had once watched an F-35 system reboot from the inside out and traced every line of that fault to its origin, alone, without assistance. They wouldn't know any of it until the night the aircraft's power grid failed mid-startup and no one volunteered to stop the meltdown. No one. That is, except the woman they had called a ghost in the hangar. The one with the sticker still tucked inside her pocket. The one who climbed into the cockpit without a word and brought the fighter back online by memory alone. The next morning, the base fell silent when she passed. Falcon Ridge wasn't on any map. Its coordinates existed in classified partitions of defense networks, buried beneath encrypted channels and time-sensitive clearance codes. From above, the desert stretched in endless silence, a wasteland of baked sand and heat haze. But, underground, beneath a retractable steel blast plate the size of a football field, lived one of the most advanced stealth aviation training programs in the world. The transport van that delivered Zoe McNeil didn't slow as it approached the barren ridge. It simply turned toward a dune and began descending, as if the earth had opened to swallow it. Inside, Zoe sat alone on the rear bench, hands resting calmly on a canvas duffel. Her standard-issue flight jumpsuit bore no patches. Her boots were well worn but clean. Around her neck, a cracked lanyard held a badge marked Civilian Observer, Level 3. The photo was recent. The designation was misleading. When the van stopped at the final checkpoint, a young officer with pressed blues and perfect posture stepped forward, scanning her ID. He squinted at the screen, then back at her. "No unit affiliation?" he asked. His tone wasn't unkind, just confused. Zoe offered a polite nod. "Assigned to passive systems observation," she said. The officer hesitated, then waved her through with a shrug, clearly deciding she wasn't important enough to delay. The elevator descended slowly into the base, each floor marked not by numbers, but by bands of light that pulsed in shifting blues and greens. By the time it reached the core level, the walls had changed from polished concrete to reinforced steel. Zoe stepped out into a corridor humming with quiet motion personnel in tailored flight suits, moving with crisp efficiency. Voices low, eyes focused. Falcon Ridge did not welcome newcomers. It absorbed them, assessed them, and if they failed to prove immediate utility, ignored them entirely. At intake, a civilian clerk scanned her file and frowned. McNeil, Zoe, observer track, no flight hours logged, no service recommendation, no field endorsements. He flipped the folder shut and slid it into a tray without comment. Briefing room D, don't interrupt. She was given no escort, no welcome packet, no handshake, just a map clipped to her file and a muttered room assignment. As she walked, she passed walls adorned with framed squadron insignias, each labeled with names that echoed through military families: Arlington, Reyes, Whitlock, legacy names, names that opened doors. She noticed the sidelong glances from passing trainees. One pair of cadets in glossy instructor-grade suits paused near the vending bay. "She's the observer," one said, not bothering to whisper. "No patches, no wings. Probably someone's niece auditing for extra credit." The other smirked. "Or another token placement. They throw one in every cycle to look inclusive." Zoe kept walking. Falcon Ridge's culture was clean, cold, and precise. Heritage was worn like armor. Some cadets had never flown outside a simulator but carried last names heavy enough to silence criticism. Their gear was monogrammed, their uniforms sharp as blades. Most had arrived weeks earlier in private convoys or flown in on chartered transport from Pentagon-run schools. She arrived in briefing room D and took the last seat near the back. A holographic screen lit up with aircraft telemetry. Around her, the trainees leaned back confidently, legs stretched, data pads glowing. No one acknowledged her. When the instructor entered, the room fell quiet. He scanned the group, then landed on her with a flicker of confusion. "Observer," he said without using her name. "Stay clear of the pilot side input feeds. You won't need them." He moved on, flipping open a flight brief. Zoe opened her folder silently. She didn't react to the subtle scoff from the cadet beside her, or the sharp glance from a red-haired girl across the aisle who rolled her eyes and whispered. She brought a paper notebook. Later, during orientation, a thin packet of base protocols was distributed. Zoe's copy was marked in red restricted SIM input blocked. She was not to operate any control interfaces. Just watch, listen, observe. She noted the restriction and turned the page. In the cafeteria that evening, the gap between groups was visible in the seating. Tables clustered by family origin, flight record, or sponsorship. Zoe sat at a corner table with her meal tray and a black notebook. She didn't try to join anyone. No one offered a seat. A cluster of cadets at the center table laughed as one of them mimicked someone tripping over a cable, probably how our observer logs a kill shot. She looked up once, then back down. Her father's boot tag, its engraving worn to a dull silver, rested in the bottom of her duffel. She had not taken it out since arriving. She didn't need to. Its weight was familiar. She kept it close the way others kept passwords or badges or medals. The lights in her dorm clicked off at 2200 hours. Zoe lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to muffled conversations in the hallway outside. Talk of gear upgrades, combat sim results. One voice laughed and called out, "That hangar rat's still here." She turned to face the wall. Falcon Ridge had given her clearance to observe, but no seat at the table, no name in the directory, no voice in the room. That was fine. She wasn't here to be welcomed. She was here to remember. And when the time came, to act. The day started like the others, with a silent march through corridors that seemed to echo with unspoken hierarchies. Zoe arrived early to the simulator hall, taking her usual seat in the rear observation row, the one assigned to non-integrated observers. Per the official chart, her terminal, like always, blinked once on startup and then went black. A blue notification in the corner read, "Access restricted." She made no comment. Around her, the cadets buzzed. Most had already begun their warm-ups, sliding on their wrist sensors, calibrating motion sinks. Across the room, Reed Garrison, son of Air Force General Nolan Garrison, strode in late, holding a coffee in one hand and a helmet bag in the other. His reputation arrived before he did mock dogfight record holder, squadron legacy, untouchable. As he passed Zoe's row, he made no effort to adjust course. The cup tipped, hot liquid sloshing down the front of her jumpsuit. The stain spread quickly, soaking into the pale gray fabric. Reed paused, looked down at her chest, and grinned. "Oh no," he said, Faux surprised. Guess the hangar rat likes jet fuel with her breakfast. A few cadets nearby chuckled. One of them lifted his phone as if to capture the moment. Zoe didn't flinch. She took a cloth from her pocket, dabbed the worst of the mess, and resumed looking at the projection screen. Reed walked off without apology. Later that afternoon, during a live sim drill, Instructor Maddox made a point to call out names. Each trainee was assigned a mission track, a role in the virtual sortie. When Zoe's terminal lit up, she tapped the screen. Nothing. Maddox looked her way, expressionless. "Observer," he said coldly. "Leave the input modules to people who actually qualify. Try not to unplug anything by accident." The room snickered. Zoe nodded once and folded her hands in her lap. That evening, in the common hall, she passed a group of trainees gathered around a tablet. Laughter erupted as she moved by. She caught a glimpse of the screen. Someone had added a new photo to the group feed, a grainy image of her at the cafeteria, seated alone, labeled with the caption, "Lunch for One, Rat Edition." The comments underneath were worse. One read, "Can't tell if she's here to fly or vacuum the Sims." Another added, "If she logs a kill, I'll eat my wings." She kept walking. It became a pattern. A new sticker showed up on the back of her chair every other day, each one a variation of property of maintenance, tech support, or simply rat. No one claimed responsibility. No one stopped it either. Even the instructors looked away. In the locker corridor, her jumpsuit was switched out once with a torn backup flight suit 2 sizes too small. In the simulator hall, someone set her access key to loop the loading screen. In the cafeteria line, a cadet reached over her tray to grab an extra ration bar, then said, "Didn't know civvies got full meals. Guess standards are slipping." Zoe remained unbothered in expression, but her movements became quieter, tighter, as though shrinking into the space she was barely allowed to occupy. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. She memorized control sequences from overhead monitors, noted procedural errors in cadet drills, watched which instructors gave real feedback and which ones played favorites. She studied the F-35 sim architecture down to its lowest logic string without touching a single console. She watched, and she remembered. In the data lab, she sat behind a glass partition meant to isolate non-authorized observers. No one checked her presence. No one monitored the fact that, while she couldn't touch the interface, she kept a handwritten ledger beside her, each page filled with engine diagnostics, override timing reports, and recalibration benchmarks. One evening, during a scheduled maintenance window, a technician leaned into the bay and joked, "Careful around that one. Quiet types always snap eventually." His coworker laughed. "Hope she doesn't short the flight deck. That suit doesn't look fireproof." Zoe pretended not to hear. In the second week, Reed made it worse. After a simulated landing exercise, he walked straight to her desk and dropped a folded paper in front of her. It was her own intake form. Someone had found it and copied it. Across the top, they had scrawled "Does not belong" in red ink. At the bottom, in block letters, someone had added 0 hours, 0 merit, 0 chance. She folded the paper once and placed it in her notebook without a word. By the third week, her name had become shorthand for failure. Instructors used her presence as a joke. "Don't pull a Zoe," they said when someone fumbled a joystick input. Cadets called each other McNeil when someone forgot a protocol. Someone even made a mock patch, a rat silhouette inside a pilot's helmet. They pinned it to the back wall above her desk. Still, Zoe said nothing. She drank her coffee in silence. She sat through briefings with her notes open. She nodded at instructors who never once spoke her name. And she watched every mission, every failure, every shortcut taken by people who believed they were untouchable. She didn't respond when a group of trainees passed her in the corridor and whispered, "She looks like she's studying for a test she'll never take." She didn't move when a message appeared on her terminal screen, clearly hacked, reading, "Time to clean up. Hangar rat. The adults are flying." Instead, she flipped to a fresh page in her notebook and began writing the reboot code for the manual override sequence on the F-35's ground lock failsafe, line by line. No one noticed, and that was their mistake. The corridors emptied after 2,200 hours. Falcon Ridge powered down in stages, overhead lights dimmed, projection displays faded to standby, and the echo of boots on polished concrete gave way to a deeper stillness. It was in this quiet that Zoe moved best, unseen and uninterrupted. She entered the flight archives with her badge on a lanyard that no longer scanned cleanly on first try. The door buzzed once, hesitated, then admitted her with a reluctant click. Inside. The room was cooler than the rest of the base, and dust hung faint in the glow of low strip lighting. Tall shelves held manuals decades old, interspersed with digital databanks that flickered when touched. At this hour, no one came down here. Not the cadets, not the instructors, not even maintenance. Zoe walked directly to the last row, an older cabinet marked Redacted FXS Series. She opened the drawer and pulled out a battered flight binder. Its cover creased, the corners bent. Across the top, faded in red ink, was a name she had traced with her finger more than once. Capty R. McNeil. She flipped through the pages, each filled with notations in her father's handwriting. His pen marks were angular, exacting diagrams of flight sequences, hand-drawn electrical routes, margin notes referencing failed override attempts. He had logged everything, Ramon, even when no one had asked him to. Especially then. Her eyes paused on a schematic sketch of the F-35's early cockpit interface, where a block labeled Manual Suppression Link was circled. Beside it, in the narrowest of print, he had written, 5-step sequence, only activate under isolated ground fault. She copied the diagram onto a fresh page of her notebook, drawing each line by memory now. She had studied this page a dozen times before, but she traced it again. She didn't rush. She never did. She spent an hour reviewing backup startup commands from pre-flight test simulations, matching lines of code against errors she had witnessed firsthand in the simulator bay. Her notes were meticulous. She compared throttle sensitivity ranges and then reviewed a printout that listed test pilot access logs. Her father's name was buried near the top of one sheet, logged as the first to manually override an unresponsive landing gear system on a classified stealth platform. That flight had nearly killed him. She had been 9 years old. Next, she retrieved a rolled blueprint from the bottom shelf, an old simulator architecture design from the early dev team. It wasn't classified anymore, just forgotten. She spread it across the floor, knelt down, and traced the emergency override circuit from the primary boot panel to the oxygen power relay. From memory, she marked the exact moment where a miscalibrated failsafe would force the pilot into autonomous loop mode. The base considered the system fail-proof. She had seen enough to know better. By midnight, she had filled 8 new pages in her notebook. Some were equations, some full-throttle arc maps, others broken sequences translated from source code into handwritten logic trees. Her father had taught her to think in layers: symmetry first, then function, then improvisation. She glanced down at his old test log once more, the edge worn from years of folding. On the inside cover, barely legible now, he had written a phrase she had repeated to herself many times. If the sky forgets you, make the aircraft remember. Her pen hovered for a moment above that line, then dropped to her side. From somewhere deep in the base, a sound rang out. Faint, distant, but distinct. The rising pulse of an emergency test alarm. It wasn't a drill tone. This one was different. It started low and held steady, the kind used during propulsion misfires or override faults. Zoe looked up and listened. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she stood. gathered her notebook, rolled the blueprint tight, and returned everything to its place. She tucked her father's log into her bag and walked back to the door. She didn't head toward the hangar. Not yet. Whatever had triggered the alarm would either resolve or escalate. She would wait. And if it escalated, if it became what she suspected it might, then she would already know what to do. It began with a low-frequency buzz that pulsed through the metal infrastructure of Falcon Ridge like a heartbeat gone wrong. Then the alarm systems engaged no warning, no drill, just a piercing double tone reserved for system overrides and classified emergencies. Across the compound, lights flared red and white in stuttering rhythm, casting harsh shadows on the concrete walls. Inside the hangar bay, chaos erupted. The new F-35 prototype, an advanced variant equipped with autonomous combat algorithms and stealth-invisible avionics, was powering on without pilot input. A cluster of engineers surrounded the main diagnostic panel, shouting over one another, their hands flying across controls that refused to respond. On the flight deck, the aircraft's HUD flickered violently. Its engines hummed with building voltage, and a blue warning banner glowed on its forward hull, weapons mode initializing, locked control path. "Whoa, what do you mean it's booting weapons?" barked Lieutenant Colonel Sharp. His face flushed, sweat beading at his temples. "Who gave clearance?" "No one," replied a technician, voice shrill. "It's bypassing all manual fail-safes. Someone tried to sync remote shutoff. It rejected the input." Around them, cadets and junior officers had gathered, most still in their standard duty suits, a few holding half-empty energy drink cans, unsure whether to run or freeze. Reed Garrison stood at the edge of the circle, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. For once, he didn't have a joke ready. "Is this a test?" someone muttered. "If it is, it's not from our side," said a major from the systems division. "We've lost full telemetry. And if that aircraft completes the sequence and engages auto-launch, we don't just lose a fighter, we breach multiple treaties." A different technician leaned over the interface, typing rapidly, only to be thrown back by a burst of static from the console. "It's rejecting human overrides. AI sync is partially active." Sharp stepped forward. "We need someone who knows the internal logic pathways, who here has worked on autonomous lockout clearance." No one answered. He turned in a slow circle. "Anyone. Step up." Silence. Someone cleared their throat. Another took a step backward. In the back, an instructor mumbled, "My clearance doesn't cover that module." A captain shook his head. "I'm not risking cascade ignition." Zoe stood near the edge of the comm station, her bag slung over one shoulder, notebook still inside. The red lights made her appear almost translucent against the industrial walls. No one had noticed her arrive. She watched the room, her expression unreadable. A faint breeze from the pressure system stirred her collar. Sharp's voice cracked. "We need someone in that cockpit. Right now." Reed opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw tensed. No one moved. Zoe set down her bag. A few heads turned as she walked forward. At first, the movement didn't register, just another tech maybe, someone delivering data. Then someone recognized her. A cadet blinked. "Isn't that—" But he didn't finish. She stopped just outside the blast perimeter and looked toward the aircraft. The fighter pulsed with quiet menace. The startup tones were nearing completion. 60 seconds to engine ignition. "I can do it," she said quietly. Sharp turned. "What?" "I can shut it down. I know the override path." Her voice was calm, measured, no urgency, no plea, just fact. Reed scoffed. That's suicide. You're not even on the roster." "She's not cleared for cockpit input," snapped the major. "She's a non-integrated observer. We can't allow—" "I've seen that variant's source logic. I've mapped the manual override circuits. If someone doesn't go in now, you'll be evacuating the entire western compound." Sharp stared at her. "Who are you?" Zoe didn't answer. A guard stepped in front of her. "Back away, miss. This isn't your call." She looked at him, then at the aircraft. "Someone has to go in, and no one else is moving." Sharp hesitated, then motioned to the emergency locker. "Gear her up." "What?" the major hissed. "You're just going to let—" "If she's lying, we're already done. If she's not, she's the only one who's stepped forward." The guard reluctantly pulled open the locker. Inside was a sealed emergency pilot suit, older, insulated, but still functional. Zoe unzipped her jumpsuit halfway, pulled the flight suit over her clothes, and fastened the collar tight. The gloves took a moment to find. She strapped on the emergency oxygen mask and retrieved the portable access toolkit from the locker's bottom tray. Someone handed her a comm headset. She ignored it. As she walked toward the cockpit ladder, the room quieted. All the noise, the warnings, the murmurs, the disbelief fell away. Reed watched her pass, stunned. One of the instructors who had once mocked her shifted back into the shadows. No one reached out to stop her now. The ladder was narrow and slick from the coolant mist that had sprayed earlier. Zoe climbed with steady hands, each rung thudding under her boots. At the top, the canopy hissed open, just enough to reveal the control frame, flickering and erratic. She paused, then ducked into the seat, her silhouette barely visible beneath the cockpit glass. From below, Sharp spoke into the mission control mic. "Who the hell is she?" No one answered. Above them, the F-35's ignition light turned amber. The system paused, awaiting final confirmation. Inside the cockpit, Zoe placed her fingers on the manual console. She didn't tremble. She didn't speak. She simply started inputting the sequence only she had memorized. Inside the cockpit, the heat was immediate, trapped between flickering instruments and the low hum of a system trying to correct itself. Zoe slid into the pilot seat, her knees tight against the control housing, gloved hands already moving. The HUD glitched in waves of static, sharp bursts of blue and green rolling across the glass. Warnings screamed across every surface: lockout active, power routing failed, comms link down. She didn't flinch. She reached beneath the primary interface, feeling along the underside until her fingers found the recessed toggle most had long forgotten existed. It wasn't on any modern schematic. Only early prototypes had included a physical bypass beneath the signal conversion unit. Her thumb slid over it, once to confirm. Then she flipped it. The screen cleared by half. The left panel came online with reduced brightness, showing manual throttle mode in amber. She pulled open the emergency utility drawer and withdrew the connector pin that bridged the override core to the alternate ignition. Her father had mentioned it once, how the backup port had to be physically grounded before software could be forced into fail-safe startup. Zoe unstrapped the portable access tool from her thigh pocket and inserted the pin. A low chime sounded, softer than the rest. Manual command accepted. In mission control, the room was silent except for the whispering hiss of system feeds. The base commander leaned toward the screen. "Someone's in control," he said, voice barely audible. "They just forced the first barrier open." "Who is she?" someone asked. Reed stood stiff behind the glass, watching the F-35's canopy light slowly fade from red to white. "She doesn't even have clearance," he muttered. "How is she even breathing in that seat?" Inside, Zoe tapped a short sequence on the panel's lower console. Her father's handwriting had been careful. The string of 6 commands had once been exclusive to tech engineers testing stealth recovery loops. It was a sequence scrubbed from later versions, but the core, this model, still recognized it. The throttle lock released. Power surged beneath her, measured and clean, like breath returning to lungs. The engine systems rolled through their checks, each indicator turning from red to orange to green. A final warning blinked 3 times. Flight mode manual authorization only. Zoe reached for the ignition coil and paused. On her wrist, taped beneath her glove, was the faded ink of a note she'd written months earlier. It was her father's code, simplified and handwritten from memory. She had reviewed it until it became reflex. Her thumb tapped the last 3 digits. The screen pulsed once, then stabilized. Outside the bay, a long mechanical groan echoed as the launch doors retracted. The F-35's landing gear settled onto the tarmac. Its shadow stretched under the hangar lights. "Someone report," Sharp demanded through the comm. "Can we reach her?" "She disabled external audio," the tech said. "We can see her movements, but she's not broadcasting." Zoe tightened her grip on the throttle. She scanned the panel one last time, nodding once to herself. Then she eased the lever forward. The fighter rolled from the hangar with eerie silence, its stealth chassis almost glowing under the wash of rotating beacon lights. No one moved as it coasted across the concrete, engines quiet, the air thick with anticipation. The comm buzzed again. "She's actually going to take it up," someone whispered. "That's an untested bird with a locked AI core." From the observation deck, cadets crowded the glass. The instructors, the engineers, even the base commander stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the woman they had dismissed prepare for lift. Zoe adjusted the flight yoke, clicked into the flaps control, and initiated a low-speed taxi check. The aircraft responded with perfect calibration. Every input held. The machine recognized her. At the edge of the runway, she turned the jet into the wind. Her fingers tightened. Then she pushed. The engine came to life with a smooth, low roar. Not the scream of full thrust, but a carefully managed release of power. The F-35 lifted off the ground without tremor, nose angled gently skyward. The wheels retracted. The aircraft gained altitude. In the tower, breath held in collective suspension finally released. "She just flew it," Sharp said. "She just flew it clean." "No weapons engaged," the systems officer confirmed. "Stability holding. Heat profile is minimal." "She's not just flying it," someone added. "She's piloting it. From a deadlock." Zoe soared above the outer compound, looping once over the base perimeter. From inside the cockpit, the world below shrank into smooth lines of desert and steel. The controls responded like they knew her hands. No resistance. No lag. She performed a banking turn, dropped the nose, then leveled at a perfect altitude glide. Inside the aircraft, there was only the hum of systems and the memory of her father's voice, once heard over static during his own test flights. Trust the design, but own the sequence. She owned it now. As she began her approach, the tower crackled with stunned silence. "She's bringing it back," said the flight tech. "Perfect line, full control." Zoe landed the fighter in a single unbroken motion, the wheels kissing the tarmac without even a whimper. She coasted into the hangar, powered down each system, and waited until the canopy began to rise on its own. Outside, the entire bay had gathered. No one clapped, no one spoke. The aircraft sat still beneath the floodlights, a monument not to simulation or theory, but to someone who had never touched a simulator, never flown in their elite squadron, never been acknowledged. Until now, the moment Zoe cut power. The cockpit lights dimmed in a soft fade, and the F-35 systems eased into a quiet rest. She sat motionless for a breath, her gloves resting on her lap, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The flight suit clung to her with the damp weight of sweat and focus, the interior heat mixing with the ghost of adrenaline. She reached for the release and slowly raised the canopy, letting the cool night air flood into the space that had, for 10 minutes, belonged only to her. Outside, the base was still, not quiet silent. No one moved as she stood. Her boots struck the metal rungs of the cockpit ladder in measured descent. As she stepped onto the tarmac, the gathered crowd parted instinctively. Cadets, officers, engineers, instructors all watched with unreadable faces. Some stunned, some ashamed. No one spoke. She walked calmly across the hangar floor, helmet under one arm, the emergency gear sealed around her like armor. The sticker still faintly pressed to the inside lining of her suit itched against her ribs, but she didn't remove it. Then the crowd opened, and from it emerged a man in full dress uniform, General Carter Winfield, commander of Falcon Ridge and one of the longest-serving stealth program veterans, stepped forward with slow, deliberate movements. He had not spoken during the flight, not when the alarms went off, not when the launch doors opened. But now he approached, silver hair gleaming beneath the overhead lights, his medals silent at his chest. He stopped 3 paces in front of her. Zoe stood straight, her posture effortless. He looked at her for a long time, eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but in study. Then he saluted. "Ms. McNeil," he said, voice low but carrying. "Daughter of Captain Rowan McNeil, test pilot, override specialist, the only man in recorded history to complete the full stealth re-entry protocol manually and live to talk about it." The silence deepened. The general lowered his salute and continued. "Your father's signature was still coded into the legacy lineage of the override framework. Tonight, when the system unlocked, your command was accepted because that legacy had never been purged, because someone kept it alive." Zoe's expression didn't change. "I checked the access log," he added. "Only one name came up. Yours. You knew the codes. You performed a full throttle bypass without external sync. You manually flew an AI-bound aircraft on a dead system." He stepped back half a pace, looking to the crowd behind her. "For weeks, this base questioned your presence, laughed at your name, stripped your rank before you were even given one. Tonight, you proved something no simulator could. You didn't earn your place because of your father's legacy. You earned it because you flew what none of us could." Someone in the formation shifted. Reed Garrison stood near the front of the cadets, face pale, arms rigid at his sides. His jaw worked, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Another cadet, the same one who had tossed the sticker across the training hall, looked down at his boots. Near them, Instructor Maddox stood with a clenched jaw, his gaze fixed firmly ahead, not daring to meet Zoe's. The general turned back to her. "You've saved this program from a catastrophic failure. You've exposed flaws we thought were impossible, and you've done it without demanding recognition." He motioned to an aide who stepped forward with a small velvet box. Winfield opened it, revealing a flight insignia and a formal clearance patch, black, silver-trimmed, bearing the sigil of the elite override unit. "I offer this to you now. Rank, command, a fleet, if you want it." Zoe looked at the box, then at the general. Her eyes were steady. "No," she said. He blinked. "I didn't come for rank," she said softly. "And I didn't come to lead." She reached into the side pocket of her suit and pulled out the crumpled yellow sticker. Without a word, she walked to the side of the aircraft, placed it carefully on the edge of the main panel, and smoothed it flat. Then she turned back to the hangar. The general was still watching her. "Then what would you have us do?" She scanned the line of faces, each one frozen in the weight of silence, then looked back at him. "Teach them that the sky doesn't answer to names, or legacy, or rank. It answers to clarity, to mastery, and to whoever dares to fly when everyone else steps back." Winfield nodded once, his expression unreadable. Understood. She gave a single nod and began walking past the crowd. No one stopped her. No one spoke. The cadets remained in formation, but a few turned slightly as she passed, their eyes following her like they had finally begun to see what had been in front of them all along. Reed took a small step forward as if to say something, but the words never left his lips. Zoe walked on. She made her way past the simulator bay where her screen had always been dark, past the briefing room where her name had never been called, past the cafeteria tables where no one had offered her a seat, and finally, past the dorms where the chatter had once mocked her. She moved with the same quiet grace she had carried from day one. Nothing about her posture had changed, except now, the silence behind her wasn't filled with laughter. It was filled with recognition. As she reached the final corridor, she paused by a bench. There, in her old duffel, was the flight log she'd carried every day. She opened it, tore out a page with her father's last handwritten sequence, and placed it on top of the aircraft checklist posted to the wall. Then she slipped the duffel over her shoulder and disappeared into the quiet of the base's outer ring. No camera followed, no title was announced. But, behind her, a generation of pilots stood still, remembering the night when the only person who dared to act wasn't the one with wings. It was the one who didn't ask for them. No formal announcement was ever made, no press release, no ceremony, no broadcasted acknowledgement. And yet, within 48 hours of Zoe McNeil's flight, Falcon Ridge began to change. The override incident was logged as an internal systems failure, followed by a manual intervention by an unnamed test participant. The official record remained vague, but everyone who had been there knew. The engineers who had failed to access the startup sequence. The cadets who had stepped back. The instructors who had stared at her file for weeks without once reading past the word observer. They had seen it with their own eyes. Within a week, the training program underwent its first policy revision in over 2 decades. Legacy exemptions were reviewed. The application criteria changed. Cadets arriving in the next cycle were no longer ranked by surname or bloodline, but by simulation accuracy, diagnostics, comprehension, and written essays on systems resilience. For the first time, a question was added to the application. Describe a moment where your silence taught you more than your voice. Briefing Room D, where Zoe had once sat alone in the back corner, was retrofitted with an extra panel, a nod to the fact that sometimes an observer understands more than a pilot. The terminal she never used was left powered on, its interface background altered to display a faint symbol in the corner, a stylized Z overlaying a stealth wing. Cadets noticed. So did the instructors. In one of the officer lounges, a new display case was mounted beside a wall of medals and squadron patches. Inside it sat a single yellow sticker, once crumpled and discarded. It had been flattened carefully, its edges preserved in glass. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, "The only label that mattered was the one she ignored." Zoe's dorm room was never reassigned. The bed remained made, the locker empty. No one said it aloud, but most avoided the door, not out of fear or superstition, but respect. Some mornings, junior cadets left folded notes on the desk inside. Some asked for guidance, others left only blank pages. They weren't expecting replies. They were acknowledging her silence. Rumors spread, first within Falcon Ridge, then across other stealth training bases. The override pilot who saved an F-35 in full weapons boot with no authorization. The woman who walked into the cockpit with no wings and left without a word. Some claimed she had been planted by upper command as a stress test. Others said she was the daughter of a lost pilot whose name still echoed in classified files. A few whispered that she'd simply walked away afterward and vanished into the desert. But no one questioned what she did. Every trainee knew the silhouette of that night, the fighter arcing against the stars, silent as breath, piloted by someone they had ignored. It became a cautionary tale, then a lesson, and finally, a standard. Instructors rewrote their approach. During simulations, they paused before dismissing quiet cadets. During briefings, they watched for the ones who listened more than they spoke. And during application reviews, they looked beyond names, checking for the hand-drawn diagrams, the handwritten notes, the grit that couldn't be bought. Some cadets asked why she hadn't stayed, why she hadn't taken command, or accepted a rank, or allowed them to honor her properly. The staff would only say, "Some people aren't here to be remembered. They're here to make sure the right people are." Across the country, another stealth facility quietly renamed its independent flight archive. It was now listed in the logs as McNeil Access Wing. No one at that facility had ever met Zoe, but they had all heard of her. One engineer even claimed she had visited their records room for 20 minutes, scanned 3 old override blueprints, and disappeared before he could ask her name. Those rumors were never verified, but they endured. At Falcon Ridge, the story turned into something more than history. It became a living shadow, woven into the hangars and hallways, into how the staff trained and how the cadets watched the sky. The older officers stopped dismissing those who arrived without pedigrees. The junior ones learned quickly who Zoe had been, even if her name never appeared on the flight roster. It was never about credit. It was about what she did. Late one night, weeks after her flight, a new cadet stood alone on the hangar floor. He had finished his drills early, exhausted and restless. The others had gone to the barracks. He wandered to the bay doors, stared up at the curved ceiling where the floodlights met steel ribs, and tried to picture the moment what it must have been like to take off from this very ground. Fly with no help, no comms, no confirmation. Just memory and instinct and courage. He didn't know her face. He'd only heard pieces, but he knew what it meant. He looked down at his gloved hands, then at the quiet aircraft resting behind him. The F-35 powered down, reflected the overhead light like a dark mirror. He stood still for a long time, breathing in the hush. Then he whispered, "I'll be ready." He didn't say it to anyone, but the hangar, somehow, felt like it had listened. And above him, the night stretched wide and waiting. Sometimes the ones overlooked carry the deepest knowledge, the strongest resolve, and the clearest sense of purpose. Zoe McNeil was never meant to be seen. She arrived without a name, a rank, or a voice anyone cared to hear. And yet, when everything failed, she was the one who stepped forward, not to be applauded, not to prove anything, but because it was the right thing to do. Her story is a reminder that true strength is quiet. It does not need permission to act. It does not wait for recognition. It simply endures, prepares, and rises when no one else will. If Zoe's journey moved you, take a moment to reflect on those you've underestimated or the quiet strength you carry within. Leave a comment to share your thoughts, and follow for more stories that honor grace, grit, and the power of staying grounded when the world looks away.